Thank you all so much for joining us for this quarter's member benefit webinar and summer professional development key committee meeting. I'm Rochelle Yukich, for those who don't know me. And for Pride Month, we've invited the incredible Cassie to talk with us about the language of allyship. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce Cassie. If you need technical support during this webinar or in your day-to-day lives, remember the tech helpline is available and free for all members. It is a perk of being an Oregon Realtor. For CE credit, you will receive CE credit if you've registered for this class through the Oregon Realtors and are logged in Zoom with your name. So if you don't know already, to update your name, go to participants, right click on yourself and select rename to make sure that you get this CE credit. This webinar is 90 minutes, so it will count as a 1.5 credit hour, but you must remain in the full class to be eligible for the CE. Professional Development Committee members, your attendance for our summer meeting will be counted as long as your Zoom name is your name. So if you're interested in joining a committee, applications are open now, and we really encourage you to get involved. Reach out anytime if you have questions about a committee or an application process. The link should be in the chat. And so speaking of questions, we want to encourage interactions on this webinar. So please use the chat to ask your questions. You can send questions directly to Cassie and I by selecting to all presenters in the chat box. And we want to make sure a productive civil conversation for everyone. And so attendees who share inflammatory, disrespectful, or unrelated messages or opinions within the chat will be removed from this webinar without a refund or continuing education credit. But we want to thank you for engaging in this event and in the spirit of learning and respect. So please ask your questions in the spirit of good faith. Okay, all right. So with that, I am so happy to introduce Cassie. Cassie Breiter is writer and public speaker focusing on intersectionality and diversity, equality, and inclusion. She is the founder and editor of empoweredtranswoman.com. Cassie's article on medium.com have over 750,000 views, and she's a frequent guest speaker at conferences, podcasts, and panels. Cassie has conducted diversity training programs for sexologists, law firms, and nonprofit organizations since 2017. You can learn more about her at cassiebreiter.com. Please join me in welcoming Cassie. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Do I have the microphone? Should I just go? Excellent. I'm really glad that we can do this. I hear that we have over 100 people in the room, so I'm really, really proud and excited to be able to bring you this presentation. I have a little bit of a long preamble, but sometimes I really feel like we need to get ourselves all in the same room in order to start. So I had these thoughts going through my head. I didn't sleep a lot. I had all these thoughts going through my head, so I want to share some of them with you. Recently, I wrote a fairly long article called Define Woman, because this has become a little bit of a catchphrase. It is a really good question. It's a thoughtful question, but at the same time, it can be a little bit of a gotcha question. The thing is that everything that we define, everything that we catalog, anything that we perceive and then we decide to have an opinion or a position on is relative. It's either relative biologically, it's either relative physically, or it's also just relative in the lens that we look at things. I'll give you an example. We can all agree that the sky is blue. I think that as children, we're always taught that the sky is blue. I live in Portland, Oregon. The sky is gray a lot. At dusk, the sky becomes pink and orange and purple and all kinds of beautiful colors. I was talking about this with my children, and my son had an answer that I hadn't even fathomed yet. He said half the time the sky is black. And it hadn't even occurred to me. That's almost 50% of the time. The sky is pitch black because it's night. So the sky is blue most of the time during waking hours in some places. So it's really good to get the nuance of things. Do you see what I mean? So for example, a day lasts 24 hours. Generally speaking, a day lasts 24 hours. That's not the case in the north, in the true north, like the upper parts of the Arctic, where they can last 6 months. So everything is relative in that sense. It's relative even at a physical level, and then we try to catalog it. And when we try to catalog it, we usually oversimplify, or it's just oversimplifies just by virtue of the fact that it's our lens, our human lens, that's cataloging it. I'll give you an example about human cataloging. Let's talk about Pierre. By the way, I made Pierre up. I never met Pierre. But Pierre is French. Pierre will tell you that he's French. Pierre speaks only French, with a smattering of Italian, but for the most part, he speaks only French. He listens to Edith Piaf. He has a picture of the Eiffel Tower on the wall. He has all kinds of French knickknacks and lots of cheese in his house. Now, that said, Pierre lives 30 kilometers south of the border in Italy, where he's lived all his life. So, is Pierre French? And then it becomes really nuanced, because the Italian Revenue Service will tell you categorically that Pierre is in fact Italian. But if he hangs out with anybody, then everybody will immediately class him as French. The question becomes, who is doing the cataloging and for what purpose? So that's really important. We have stuff like, we have the blood quotient for Native Americans, defining what makes a Native American or not. These are human constructs. Now, I'm not saying that human constructs are non-existent. They're very much existent and they rule our lives. Money is a human construct, and I would rather have some than none. But it's just important to know that some things we've made up. Some things are not real in the sense of a physical truth. Some things are things that we made up and we live by. The idea of school is a social construct. These are things that we made up in our society in order to bolster our society, and sometimes they need to be challenged. From that point of view, slavery was a social construct, and over time we deconstructed it because we found it unhealthy and dehumanizing. So social constructs are something that we build and something that we can tear down. And then there's biological and physical facts, and we can interpret that through a human eye, and sometimes we get that wrong, as in the example of like night and day or anything else. So I'm going to share my screen at some points of this presentation. Hopefully you can still see my face even when I share my screen, but sometimes I might come back just so that you don't lose sight of me. Hold on, I'm going to get my video panel going so I can still see at my end. Okay, hopefully everybody's seeing a purple and white screen. Could you write in the chat if you can see that? Write yes if you can see a purple and white screen. Excellent. Okay, so I'm not sharing my email or something. This is good. Okay, so Arizona respects daylight savings time, which is a construct in the United States. We could say that the United States practices daylight savings time, as opposed to countries that don't. So the United States practices daylight saving time. Oh no, sorry, Arizona doesn't. As opposed to Arizona, that does not. In Arizona, they don't practice daylight savings time. That is, of course, with the exception of the Navajo Nation. The Navajo Nation is about 1/3 or 1/4 of Arizona, spilling over into Utah and Colorado. And the Navajo Nation does practice daylight savings time. Well, that is, of course, except for the Hopi Nation, which is encompassed by the Navajo Nation. And the Hopi Nation does not practice daylight savings time. To go farther, the Hopi Nation is divided into 2 territories. So in order to go from one territory of the Hopi Nation into another one, you have to drive through Navajo territory. So you could drive in a straight line across Arizona and have to change your clock 7 times. Now, in the process of doing that, you could say to yourself, why are they making my life difficult? And it's really interesting if that thought comes to us about why are they making our life difficult, because they're not. They're just living their peaceful lives in the best way that they can. We have the audacity of driving through their lives, of driving through their territory. And we have to adjust to how we experience them, whatever it might be. And yeah, it's a little bit annoying to have to change your clock 7 times. But that's what you have. I think at some point of my life, I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to have to drive through that area just to experience that. An interesting side note that I want to say is that as you change your clock, as you drive through these areas, time doesn't change. So what we call things and what they are is kind of different. You know, to make it a rudimentary example, if I pick up an apple, and because I'm Spanish speaking, I call it a manzana, and I bite into it, it'll still taste like an apple. So the concepts and the words that we use and the paradigms that we use to define these things are separate. And it's important to understand that all of that is relative and simplistic. Going back to the question, define woman. Well, yes, most women have a womb. Most women have fallopian tubes, except the ones that don't. I'm talking about cisgender women. I'm not talking about trans women. There's over 100 million women on this planet that are either born with one fallopian tube, or are born without a uterus, or are born with 2 vaginas, or are born with no vagina. Over 100 million. MKRH syndrome and several other things. And yeah, we can say, well, but that's an exception. Yeah, sure, but those exceptions make up over 100 million people. If you think about it, in 1990, we passed a law for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we put, the guardrails in the bathrooms and all that. We did that because on the planet, there's over 100 million people who are handicapped. So we don't dismiss a demographic that's about 1% or 0.5% of the population. Because with 7.2 billion people on this planet, that ends up being a significant number. That ends up being in the billions. Anyway, all of this is preamble. The key thing is, what do people want? Because as a realtor, what you're trying to do is you're trying to give people what they want. When you give people what they want, they'll give you money, which works out for everybody. So what do people want? I contend that people want access to joy. And most importantly, people want freedom from fear. And everybody's driven by that. We want access to joy, and we want freedom from fear. And what does it mean? I mean, this is written into our Constitution, right? Our pursuit of liberty and happiness. So access to joy is that we can get the thing, that we can do the thing, that we can be in the space, that we can enjoy the experience, that we can strive to do the things that might bring us joy, such as owning a home in a nice neighborhood. That's what we want. We want joy. When people prevent us from joy, we feel bad. And what we want to escape is we don't want to be pushed around. We don't want to be swindled. We don't want to be cheated. We don't want to be disrespected. We don't want to be lied to, taken advantage of. We don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be imprisoned or killed. So that's what drives a lot of us. That's what drives people. And language is something that we use. Language and symbology is something that we use a lot in order to let people know, I'm your friend or I'm your enemy. I'm going to help you get access to joy, or I'm going to fill your world with fear. So language is really important. Symbology is important too. You know how we do this to salute people, and we do this to greet people. Why do we show our hand when we do that? What about this? What does this mean? It actually, this symbol that's pretty standard in the military is a vestige of when a knight met another knight on the road, and the natural reaction would be to lift your visor, show your face, and to say, look, you can see me as a human being. You can see my face, you can see my facial expressions. You can trust me. So this meant I'm willing to show transparency and show myself to you. And this meant I don't have a weapon in my hand. You can engage with my hands. I don't have a weapon in my hands. So this is all symbology. How we greet people is important. Hawaiians say aloha. aloha does not mean hello. Aloha is a spiritual practice. Aloha means I wish you peace and calm and joy. It's an absolutely incredible word. It's unfortunate that as we travel to Hawaii, we don't often learn that words are really important because words will let you know which side are we on. Here's a little aside. Somebody was talking about Ukraine yesterday, and they referred to it as the Ukraine. So in that war, there is language. If you call the capital of Ukraine Kyiv, you're saying that you side with the Ukrainians. If you call that capital Kiev, breaking the diphthong and separating it into an I and an E, Kiev, then you're pronouncing it in Russian, and you're saying, I side with the Russians. If you say Ukraine, you're respecting and acknowledging that Ukraine is an independent country for the last 30 years. If you call it the Ukraine, you're indicating that it's a region and that it's a region of Russia. So these nuances matter. Language matters. And it indicates if you're going to bring us joy or if you're going to bring us fear. Most of all, people want to be people. People want to be persons. They want their personhood. So by the way, we just celebrated Juneteenth. So I'm going to ask in the chat. Let's see who is the first one to get to say this. What does Juneteenth mean? Why do we celebrate Juneteenth? Oh, somebody wrote in the chat that namaste is another example. Namaste means hello. In fact, in Sanskrit, namaste means the divinity and spirit in me salutes the divine spirit in you, which is absolutely gorgeous. But yes, nowadays, it mostly just means hello. So somebody said the freeing of the slaves in 1865, the release of the slaves. This is all correct, emancipation. We celebrate 4th of July. That's coming up pretty soon. 4th of July was the time that we broke off with England, with the crown, and Americans became free. Well, white Americans became free. Black Americans became free with the Declaration of Emancipation. Here's something interesting. Your answers are right. I'm not trying to snob you down or something like this, but there's a nuance to this. Juneteenth does not celebrate the Declaration of Emancipation. The Declaration of Emancipation happened 2.5 years before Juneteenth. Juneteenth happened June 19, 1865, and it's when Union soldiers arrived to Galveston, Texas, and freed the last of the slaves, or announced to the last of the enslaved people, you're free. But the Declaration of the Emancipation of Proclamation happened in 1862 in April, 2.5 years earlier. People want to be free. So who are people? What are people? Well, we've all heard we the people, the Declaration of Independence, we the people. And in our Constitution, it says we the people. Who are we the people? Well, we would argue today that we the people are brown people and black people and white people and indigenous people and Irish people and women and non-binary people and white men are people. But back then, we the people just meant men. It just meant men. I would go a little farther and say that it only meant white land-owning men. Now, sure, over time, language started evolving, and we got to a position sometime in the 50s, I guess, or 60s, where every man has the right to do something. Every man should do things. Was beginning to be understood as, sure, we mean man and woman. Man meaning mankind, right? Every single time we read, he is entitled to, he can do, he should do, and stuff like that, we can imply that it also means she. But it's not written. And it's not written because originally it wasn't the case. So over time, we started saying he or she. He, ... or she. That was as an afterthought. I think that today, the use of they to mean he or she, to mean everybody, is a lot more appropriate because they doesn't have a hierarchy to it, and it doesn't mean, of course, men. Oh, and by the way, I also mean women. And also, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but there are people in this world who are neither men nor women. And some of you will say, well, of course, non-binary people. And some of you will say, what the heck is she talking about? So I'll get to that as well. Something else that's written in the Declaration of Independence about we the people is definitely not indigenous people who were cataloged as merciless Indian savages. It's still written in the Declaration of Independence. So it's important to know what we mean when we say people. Generally speaking, we all grew up with a sense of tribalism. We all grew up with a sense of xenophobia. So we know that there's us and there's them. And us forms a circle that you can trust, a circle that you like, a circle that you want to protect. And then there's them. We don't care about them. We don't want them in our circle. Them are foreigners. Them are different. Them we don't like. Something really funny I found out recently. What do people call Germans? Well, a lot of people call Germans Germans. In Britain, we call them Germans. In Greece, they're called Germans. In Spain, they're called Alemanes. In France, they're called Alemani. Also, Almani in Turkey. And in Sweden and in Denmark, they're called Tiska. This is Tiskland, Germany. So, oh, and by the way, like in Lithuania, they're called Vokitia and Vasikia. Why? Why all these different names? And then there's all of these people who call them Niemcy. Niemcy, different versions of Niema. So why, right? And which one is right? Germans don't call themselves any of these names. Germans call themselves Deutsche. So the reason why a lot of people call them Alemani is because Alemani were one tribe of the Germanic people. So that's not wrong. One tribe of theirs was called Alemani, mostly to the west. And there was another tribe called Germanis or Germans, and that also stuck. And there was another tribe called Vasika, and there was another tribe called Saksa, and another tribe called Tiska. Germany is a confederation of tribes. So all of these are relatively accurate, except for Niemcy. Niemcy is a dig. Niemcy is not a nice word. And all of Russians refer to Germans as Niemcy. It's just a standard word. There's no particular affect to it. It's just what you call them. But here's the thing, Slavic people come from the word ward. The word ward in Slavic is Slava. So all of the Slavic people understand themselves as Slavic because it means we speak. We have language. We can communicate through language, which makes us cool, of course. And Niemcy means the mute ones, means the ones that don't speak. So it's kind of a dig because Germans definitely speak. They just speak a different language. So it's really interesting how the way you call somebody can other them, can separate them, can alienate you from them. If you're French and you're referring to Alemani, you're just saying it's a different tribe from us. If you're Polish and you say Niemcy, you're saying, yeah, they're the dumb ones that don't even know how to speak. Germans don't call themselves any of that. Germans call themselves Deutsche. And what does Deutschland mean? Deutschland means the land of the people. And Deutsche means people. Now, remember the Navajo? The Navajo don't call themselves Navajo, by the way. We call them that. It's a colonized name. It's actually a Spanish word. It means long knives. But they don't call themselves that. The right word is Dene. And what does dene means? Dene means the people. Okay, so at this point I'm confused. Who are the people? Are these the people? Are these people? Or are these people? So it all depends. Are you inside the circle? Are you outside the circle? And then you're going to call yourself different things. You're going to prioritize different things. And this is the nature of today's class. It's just like, let's stop having this concentric circle mentality about, are you in the circle? Are you outside the circle? Us versus them. And in fact, instead of looking at it like this, we usually look at it like this. There's our circle, there's us, and then other people don't even have a circle. We won't even acknowledge that they might have a circle. And even within our circle, and this is what's getting to the meat of this class, what we really have inside the circle is the people at the center who truly are the people. And unfortunately, for a really, really long time in our society, that meant rich, white, landowning men. And then you have people who are also the people. The wife of the landowning white man is also the people. And then you have people that might sort of kind of be the people, but not really. People of color, queer people, etc. Handicapped people, people with disabilities, people with disabilities is a much more accurate term than saying handicap, which, by the way, is a really interesting note. You have to have the humility to realize that we're always learning. I'm still learning. So we're all going to make mistakes. Just correct yourself and move on. So people with disabilities is the proper term. Neurodiverse people, also, traditionally not quite us, not quite the people. People that fall more and more outside of this. And queer people, LGBT people, are definitely in this outsiders or undesirables for a really long time. For thousands of years, it's been like that. Mostly for 2,000 years in this particular Greco-Roman kind of civilization that we've built. It's interesting that it didn't used to be like that in many other cultures, but each culture has their own set of values, defining who we find at the center and who we find at the margins. I want to play a video that really touches on this. But first, I'm going to do a test because I want to make sure that you hear it. So this is Anne Hathaway. I'm going to play her for 2 seconds. Let me know in the chat if you can hear.
I love
I'm raising the volume.
the dignity that accompanies self-acceptance.
Wow.
And the way our collective humanity gets expanded when one wrongfully marginalized community says, we are human beings, there is enough room here for all of us, period. This declaration that one's worth is not affected by one's sexual orientation or gender is a trailblazing concept that lifts humanity into its fullest expression of itself. This is the declaration that precipitates deep, lasting change. This change, once embraced, will make us free. I hope. I really hope, you guys, but the path to freedom, to equality, is currently being blocked by a big, heavy, almost invisible lie. The lie is not about whether we are equal. The lie is about whether our opportunities are. It's important to acknowledge that whatever my actions have been, however hard I have worked, however the world may have marginalized me and my experiences, that my standing here, my ability to be visible to you, comes from the world unfairly rewarding my particular type of visibility. It is important to acknowledge that, with the exception of being a cisgender male, everything about how I was born has put me at the current center of a damaging and widely accepted myth. That myth is that gayness orbits around straightness, transgender orbits around cisgender, and that all races orbit around whiteness. This myth is wrong, but this myth is too real for too many. It is ancient, so it is trusted. It is a habit, so it's assumed to be the way things are. It's inherited, so it's thought immutable. Its consequences are dangerous because it prioritizes a certain type of love, a certain kind of body, a certain kind of skin color, and does not value in the same way anything it deems to be other to itself. It is a myth that is with us from birth, and it is a myth that keeps money and power in the hands of the few instead of being invested in the lives of the free. I appreciate this community so much because it's where I learned to reject this myth. I appreciate this community because together we are not just going to question this myth, we are going to destroy it.
Now, whenever we speak about destroying something, some people might get uneasy. And some things are worth destroying, like, for example, when we destroyed slavery. Destroying this myth that some people are at the center and some people are at the margins might make the people who have been traditionally at the center uneasy. And sometimes we have to be willing to say we're not at the center. I want you to do an exercise. I want you to close your eyes and think about a human being. I want you to think about the human being. Like if you were going to introduce this human being to an alien race and say, this is human, this is what we look like. The standard, regular, average, normal human being. You got it? Okay, open your eyes. How many of you thought of a man? Raise your hands. Actually, when you raise your hands, I can't see it, but you could write it in the chat if you want. How many of you thought of somebody white?
And you can raise your hand in Zoom with at the raise hand at the bottom of your screen.
That'll work too, but you can also write in your hand. So that's cute. Somebody thought of the song, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, when thinking of a human. This is pretty accurate. We have heads and shoulders and knees and toes. That makes us human. That's cute. How many of you thought of somebody white? And here's the thing, we usually think about the kind of person that's a majority around us, and the kind of a person that we're shown on TV, and the kind of a person that we understand to be in positions of authority and of agency and so forth. I'll tell you who the average human being is. The average human being is a 22-year-old Chinese woman. If you're going to count the kind of human being that there's the most of on the planet, that's Asian people. And that's women, because there's 51% of women on this planet compared to 49% of men. And she's 22 years old because if you count the demographics on the planet, the largest demographic right now is early 20s. So of course, we're all humans. But if you're going to think about the typical human being, it's interesting how our notion of what people are varies and how it's inaccurate, even like at a statistical level. Sadly, all of our stories are about these people in the center. All of our structures are built for these people in the center. Do you know that crash dummies are tested on men? And men are usually about a head taller than women. And that causes injuries in women when it comes to seat belts and things like that. The ones who are not at the center have to live at the margins and orbit and try to negotiate a world that's not really meant for them. And that's what we're trying to heal. So who belongs? The first woman in Congress was 1917. Write in the chat when you think that the first women's bathroom was placed in Congress. Give me a date. When do you think? 1935 said somebody, 1955, 1950. Somebody said 1985, 1970, 1960. 1960. A lot of you think 1960s because, yes, there was a lot of progress in terms of human rights in the 1960s. The first female bathroom was installed adjacent to Congress, to the Congress Hall, in 2011. 2011, that's 100 years of women having to rush to another building to go to the bathroom if you're a congresswoman. So we can be not inclusive in our structures, in our systems, and of course in our language too. So the task is to cut it out with orbits and break through this us versus them mentality. Let's try to think that them are not the enemy, and them can be part of a bigger us, an inclusive us that includes us and them. You would need to trust to us. You would need to have the trust to assume that those other people are not out to get you. They're not going to ruin your day. There was a really funny commercial about equality when marriage equality came out, where you saw a heterosexual couple with a child who were like, well, what's going to become of us now? Are we going to have to get divorced? And no, you don't have to get divorced, and you don't have to marry a gay if you don't want to. Just because there's marriage equality. Marriage equality is marriage equality for you as well. You know, this thing, there's a big controversy right now about birthing people, about using the word birthing people to define people who have birth, or to say menstruating people for people who menstruate. And there was one TikToker, I'm really addicted to TikTok. There was one TikToker who was up in arms saying, well, you know, I watched this beautiful birth, and then you know, they called the woman mother and, you know, mom. And she said, I would have felt so awful if that word had been taken away from her and replaced with birthing person. Well, yeah, good point. No one wants to do that. No one wants to do that. Women who give birth to their own child are mothers. Now, here's the thing. Women who give birth to somebody else's child are surrogates. And it's a bad idea to call them mothers because this is not their child, and they really want to keep that emotional distance separate. And there is the mother usually in the room too. So when a medical professional refers to a surrogate as a mother, they're being inaccurate and they're making a disrespectful mistake. Also, trans men usually retain a uterus during transition. And yes, trans men can get pregnant, and it does occasionally happen that a trans man gives birth. Trans men who give birth are fathers. So you say birthing people as a generic term for people that are going through the experience of birth, and then as you get to know the patient, you define this as a mother, as a surrogate, as a father, or as a parent if it's a non-binary person. You're trying to be respectful to everyone. When you call on the phone and it says press 1 for English and press 2 for Spanish and press, I don't know, 7 for Tagalog. they're not being disrespectful to you. You can still speak in English by pressing 1. And you're usually choice number 1. But there's also respect for people that don't speak English. And as a note, English is not the official language of the United States. We have like 2 or 3 official languages, Spanish being one of them. Actually, don't know exactly all of different, but look it up. It's interesting. Anyway, you need to have the empathy to consider that other people should have the same rights as you do. Think about your loved one. If you're in a couple, think about your wife or your husband. And I'm assuming I'm speaking to a heterosexual crowd, which potentially I'm making an assumption. But if you are heterosexual, think about your husband or your wife. Think about the years that you have together. Think about the real estate that you acquired together. Think about the things that you own together. Think about the children that you're raising together. Now imagine that somebody told you you can't have sex with that person ever. Imagine if somebody told you you can't kiss that person ever. You can't love that person. You can't introduce that person to parties. You can't speak about that person. You have to refer to that person as your roommate. That would not be fair to you. So why ask that of somebody else? Why put somebody else through that? You need the humility to consider that your way of looking at the world is it's not the only way. And that's something that, because of the fact that we are part of a colonizing wave, we often lose perspective of. And we tend to think that our way is the only way. And we've kind of determined that by the might of the sword. And it's time to reconsider that, and it's time to put the swords down, and it's time to decolonize yourselves and realize other people have other customs and other ways to look at it. Here's an interesting tidbit. There's a whole debate about there are only 2 genders, man and woman. So there's a finite number of genders, we say. Okay, fine. Hawaiians believe in 3 genders. Like the Lakota Sioux believe in 4 genders. And they will tell you categorically this is how many genders there are. There's a whole civilization called the Bugis people in Indonesia. There's over 6 million of these people. It's a whole nation. And they will tell you categorically that there's a finite number of genders. And there's not more than that. There's not less than that. And everybody knows this. And if you disagree with this, they will look at you funny. And all of them understand that there's 5 genders. 5. I'm not saying they're more advanced than us. I'm not saying they're more enlightened than us. I'm just saying you could catalog it differently. Okay, now I'm actually going to give you examples of inclusive language. It's about time, right? So, key principles for inclusive language. Recognize and challenge stereotypes. Thank you, Donald. I see you. And I apologize that I minimized you. Recognize and challenge stereotypes. Be inclusive and avoid omission or making others invisible, which is really apropos of the fact that I talked about the heterosexual crowd, and then somebody chimes in and saying, I'm not hetero. So anyway, be inclusive and avoid omission, making others invisible. Be respectful and avoid trivialization or subordination. Subordination meaning that somebody might feel lesser than. What it takes is to change deeply embedded habits, because some of your patterns of speech have been with you all your life. You've heard your parents speak like that, and now we're going to start changing it. But it takes us to consider the implications of words and phrases that have long gone unchallenged. Why do we not say colored people anymore? Because for one thing, that's subordination. It means that people of color, which is a different phrase, are colored in the way that they are made different from white, as opposed to being naturally people of color or non-white people. And the reason why we don't say colored people is because it comes from a time when it was okay to victimize this particular demographic. It was okay to trivialize this demographic. It was okay to demonize this demographic. So we don't want to associate our words with that era. Same thing with Oriental. I mean, for a long time, Asia was referred to as the Orient. So is it accurate to say Oriental? Possibly. Is it deeply offensive? Not particularly, but it comes from a time when there was a lot of segregation, a lot of marginalization, a lot of victimization of Asian people. So why use that word, which might convey that you're on board with all those practices? And also it takes to dig deep with empathy and imagine an experience that's not your own. So one time I was invited to give a talk, and as I was about to start talking, I was handed a device and I was told there's a deaf person in the room and I need to speak into this device. And if I ask somebody a question, I need to pass them this device. And this person is going to have to hold this device and speak into it so the person who's hard of hearing is able to hear. My first reaction was, well, this is an imposition. This was unplanned for. And it took a little bit of a reality check to myself saying, could I have the empathy of just going along and holding this little device so this one person feels included? It took that moment inside my head of readjustment. Now, it's important that I'm not talking about political correctness. I absolutely hate that term. I would really prefer if people are politically incorrect. I would really prefer if people are politically transparent. If people are naturally racist and bigoted and sexist, I would prefer to hear it and know it about themselves and then avoid the heck out of them. Political correctness is a term that means what politicians need to do to keep their thoughts private so that they don't get in trouble. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to keep negative thoughts private so we don't get in trouble. What we're trying to do is to challenge your thoughts and to arrive at better thoughts, more inclusive thoughts, more respectful thoughts. And we're not trying to say that you need to walk on eggshells. You've heard me apologize a couple of times. I make mistakes. When I make mistakes, I correct myself and I keep going. It doesn't impede me from talking. And this is what I want you to think of. If you're talking to somebody who is different from you, and you might not know how to refer to them, you could ask. And if you say something that's untoward or ignorant or clumsy or disrespectful, and you're called out on this, you could just apologize and learn. There's a wonderful phrase I really like. It's as simple as this. Thank you for helping me do better. It's perfectly okay to be ignorant of a fact. We don't all know everything all the time. What's not okay is to be stubborn about it. Once you're told, do better. There's a lot of comedians, male comedians, unfortunately, who are saying, well, you can't joke about anything anymore. You can. You can joke about whatever the heck you want. And then we have the choice of listening to you or laughing at your jokes or not listening to you and not laughing at your jokes anymore. And we have the right to say, yeah, we didn't like that. The thing with jokes, by the way, is that quite often they're used as a tool to tell you who's at the center, who belongs, and who doesn't belong. So humor can be a weapon. So I look at humor always through the filter of, are they humanizing people or are they dehumanizing people? You can actually be really funny humanizing people. Jewish humor is absolutely spectacular because it comes from struggle, it comes from marginalization, it comes from humanizing the Jewish experience. And because of that, it's rich with just humanity and tenderness, and it's funny as heck. Okay, so here's some operating principles. Person first versus identity first language. Sure, fine, I'm a trans woman. But honestly, I much prefer if I'm referred to as a woman of transgender experience. I don't mind being called a trans woman. I much prefer being called a woman. And when the nuance is important, a woman of trans experience. You could say a disabled person, but it's much better to say it's a person with a disability. Because you're centering the person and not the thing that makes them other. And this goes, demographic by demographic. Deaf people are very used to referring to themselves as deaf people. If you say the person with deafness, they might find that clumsy and weird. But the general consensus is try to move away from identity, the focus on the thing that makes them different than other, and more about what makes them a person. Another one is avoid imparting victimhood. This person is afflicted by this disease. This person suffers from this disease. This person is confined to a wheelchair. This person is a victim of sexual abuse. We want to empower people. We want to give people the respect and the dignity that they're able to negotiate their lives. So for that, there are words like this person is challenged, this person is differently abled, this person is a person with disabilities. And because of that, we also want to avoid words like, well, that's lame, because there are people who actually literally are lame, meaning that one of their leg functions less than the other. And that's what the word means. That's what the word means. So let's just say something is like, well, that's not what I want. That's not fun. We don't have to say that's lame. The word spaz refers to a particular disability, a muscular disability. Lizzo had a song that, as part of the lyrics, used the word spaz. She was called out on it, and she went back to the recording studio that same month and re-recorded the song at her expense. Now that's an example of somebody doing it right. Don't trivialize the impact of mental disabilities. We unfortunately do this all the time. That person's so bipolar, feeling so OCD this morning. Oh, I can't remember where I put my keys, I'm so ADHD. These are actual mental conditions. So trivializing these to convey just a mood that you're experiencing. Somebody was talking about the word appropriation. This is an example of appropriation, you know? So let people signify what the word really signifies. And words like crazy or mad or schizo or psycho really kind of demonize people with mental challenges. I have an acquaintance who is schizophrenic, and they're a perfectly fine human being. This is something about themselves that they feel really, really uncomfortable disclosing. They manage their condition with medication. They haven't suffered a hallucination since forever, but they're uncomfortable saying in a room that they have this condition because people would judge, because we've used these words in society to denigrate people. And don't say triggered to mean that you're annoyed. Triggered is a very specific word that refers to trauma, usually in the context of PTSD or CPTSD, about when a memory, a painful traumatic memory from the past activates, and then you're reacting to it emotionally and intellectually, and it impedes you from functioning in the moment. Use gender inclusive language. Guys is not gender inclusive. You guys, that's talking to the men. Now, again, this is like something that we're all adjusting to. I've been in social groups of lesbians and everybody in the room is a woman and people are still saying you guys. But it's better to not. It's better to say folks. It's better to say you all. The South is getting a win, you all. That works much better than you guys. You can say everyone, you can say friends, you can say hey teammates, etc. Guys is not gender. I saw a meme on Facebook. Ask a straight guy how many guys he slept with, and he'll realize really quickly that guys is not gender neutral. And avoid filtering everything through a presumption of cisgender heteronormativity. This is important to you as a realtor. If you meet a woman at the house, at the showing, don't immediately ask about her husband, because she might have a wife. Don't make these assumptions. Ask about the partner, ask about the family, and allow the other person to fill in the blanks for you and tell you what demographic they're from and what kind of structure they have going on in their family. On this point about two genders and about the classification, stuff like that, I wanted to just stop for a second and tell you humans are distributed in a bimodal distribution, but they're bell curves. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but most men would be somewhere in this point. That's why this is the highest curve, because the majority of population of male-born people identify as men and fall in this category right here. Somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger does not fit in here. Somebody like Jason Momoa does not fit in here. These people are hyper masculine. These people are much more here or here. And because of that, we see them as outliers. And because of that, they make movies. They get to make movies. Most women are somewhere in here in terms of their physicality, in terms of their expression, in terms of their identification. Kim Kardashian is not here. Pamela Anderson is not here. They're hyper feminine in their features, and they're much more in this area. There was a character in Saturday Night Live for a number of years, maybe it was 15, 20 years ago, called Pat. And the running joke about Pat is that people couldn't tell if this is a man or a woman. That's a non-binary person. And non-binary people are all the way over here. And intersex people are in this category. And these people are people too. So we're distributed in a bell curve, and most people are over here, and most people are over here, the same way that most times the sky is blue. Not always. I don't know if you've ever seen this figure. So this is a good representation. It's called the genderbread person. And it's a good explanation of the fact that identity happens in the brain. I apologize for the Kim Kardashian reference. I'm behind the times because I'm middle-aged. So there's probably a much better example of a young, beautiful woman that's hyper feminine that doesn't have to deal with that show. I just can't think of it. Ask my daughter. But anyway, identity happens in the brain. As a trans woman, my female identity is in my brain. It's not illusionary. It's just the way I'm wired. Kind of like if you took a Mac and you opened the plastic covers of a Dell and you put all the Mac insides inside of the Dell and you closed it, that's not a Dell, that's a Mac. That'll run Mac. If you took a can of peas and you poured all those peas into a can that says spinach on it, there's still peas. So my identity happens in my brain. My attraction, the people that I want to kiss, the people I want to sleep with, that's my orientation, my sexual orientation, my attraction. That happens in my heart and it happens in my sexuality. It does not happen so much. It probably happens in my brain too. This is oversimplified. My expression is the way that I look. And I happen to be a femme woman. So I have long hair, I have makeup, I wear a dress. That doesn't mean that all women have to be like that. Ellen DeGeneres does not look like me. She's a woman, her expression is different. So all of these different vectors make a human being, and they're unrelated. You can be transgender and you can be gay, or you can be transgender and be straight. By the way, I'm gonna get to the word straight in a minute. Let's talk about pronouns, right? Pronouns are the big boogaboo these days. Okay, I'm not going to go into religion, but I'm going to use a cultural example. Somebody said to me recently, well, Jesus didn't have pronouns. Yeah, he did. He did. We all knew he was he, him. Of course he had pronouns. We all have pronouns. We've always used pronouns to refer to ourselves. I'm sure that you have a pronoun that's comfortable to you. So think about that for a second. What are your pronouns? In the way that your family has always referred to you, in the way that you think of yourself. And some people have it written in their next to their name, which I really appreciate. But think about it for a second. What are your pronouns? If somebody were to refer to you, should they refer to you what would be most comfortable to you? Should they refer to you as he/him and his? Should they use hers, she, her? What would be appropriate for you? If you're a dude, if you're a guy, Wouldn't you be most comfortable with people referring to you as he and him? So anyway, I just want you to think about that for a second. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And what that means is that it would be inaccurate to refer to me by the pronouns he and him. And it would be inaccurate also to refer to me with the pronouns they and them. I'm okay with that in terms of the fact that sometimes it's good to just default to they, them for everyone. But I am proud of my gender. And quite frankly, I've worked really hard from owning my gender. So I really like when somebody respectfully addresses me as she and her. It's good to put your pronouns on your business card and next to your name and on your signature and emails and stuff like that. It means that you have thought about this and you can own your pronouns, and you're allowing other people to communicate their pronouns to you. And I'll tell you why this matters. I was once leading a class like this, but it was in person. Remember back in the before times when people met in person? And there was a room of people, and I said, please go around the room and introduce yourself, say your name and your pronouns. We arrived at one person who was over 6 feet tall. They looked like a lumberjack. They had 3-day stubble. And this person thought about it for a little time, almost to the point that I thought that they might want to pass. And then really quietly, this person said their name, and then they said, pronouns I prefer are she and her. And later, that person told me that they were trembling when they said that, and it was the first time that they said it in a public place. I wouldn't have known that about them until they communicated it to me. And that's a person who's just beginning a long, painful voyage of transition. And fine, for the sake of making it easy for you, 6 years down the line, they're going to look a lot more like me than a lumberjack. Although I'm 5'3", I hardly ever look like a lumberjack. But at the time, what they looked like is not necessarily equivalent. The assumptions that you made about them because of what they look like are not necessarily equivalent to who they are. So ask people their pronouns. Actually, once I screwed up because of trying to be a little bit too woke. I had a person deliver pizza to me, and I looked at them, and this person their gender expression was a little bit ambiguous for my eye, and I couldn't quite place. But I generally interpreted this person as AFAB. AFAB means assigned female at birth. So I thought this person's probably AFAB, but for all I know, because of the fact of how they're dressed, the lack of makeup, the lack of earrings, the lack of long hair, had a really short haircut, I'm thinking, for all I know, this person might be non-binary, or even they might be a trans man. So I don't want to make any assumptions. So I awkwardly said to them, what are your pronouns, if I may ask? And by the way, their name was Eli, E-L-I, which made my position a little bit more confusing, because I couldn't really tell by Eli which gender that is. Anyway, I said, so, I'm sorry, could I ask what pronouns do you use? And she looked at me like I'm dumb, like I don't get it. And she said, I'm a girl. And I said, but your tag says Eli. She said, no, it's Ellie. I'm Elizabeth. Which, come on, like you could spell it E-L-L-I-E. But anyway, like sometimes you stumble, sometimes you get it wrong. And that's fine. It's just an awkward moment and you move on. The key thing when you make a mistake is just respectfully apologize, correct yourself, and move on. But accept and respect people's pronouns. What does it hurt you to accept? You know, if I meet somebody and they tell me that they're a violinist, I'm not going to insist that they play for me right then and there. If somebody tells me that they're a football player, I'm not going to say like, well, I want to see you on the field before I make that adjudication about you. I just accept what they tell me about themselves, because I generally think that people know themselves, that people are not liars. And some people go by they, them. Now, I have a friend who has a huge problem with they, them. They think it's an affectation. They think that it's not real. Here's the thing. I identify as a woman. There are pronouns that are already inbuilt in society that a lot of people use that fit me perfectly. And those are she, her. So it's so easy for me to just go, yeah, that's for me. But not everyone falls in that. Not everybody can class themselves so easily. There are a lot of people who are non-binary. There's a question coming in. Yep, once we acknowledge one another, it becomes, well, you don't have to, oh my God, this takes me right back to I don't see color. You can acknowledge that person is Black, you can acknowledge that person's trans, you can acknowledge that person is gay. Just don't make it an othering and a trivializing and a demonizing thing. Just, we are all different, I am trans, I'm short, I'm left-handed. These are all parts of me. But yeah, acknowledging things is a good thing. But anyway, they, them. So I dated a non-binary person for many years, and at first I understood them very much to be a butch lesbian. And they kept telling me that they're non-binary, and I was like, all right, so this is a butch lesbian that identifies as a non-binary. No, this is not a girl, this is not a woman, this is a non-binary person. It's really funny. At one point, I had created a girls' slumber party, and there was a bunch of women, and my partner came because they wanted to be with me, and so they were hanging out there too. And we were going around the room talking about the sisterhood and the femininity, and all the girl power in the room. And my partner came up to me and whispered in my ear, "I have to get the hell out of here." They just really didn't identify with any of this. So non-binary people are valid and they exist, and they need a way to refer to themselves. And we've defaulted to they, them. We've tried zim for a little bit. It didn't take. There's several other non-gendered pronouns that you could try. You can actually search on Google for non-binary pronouns. You're going to find a few. Non-gendered pronouns, you're going to find a few. But they, them is the easiest one. Think about this. I'm going to tell you a story. I was in LA over Pride, and on the floor there was a wallet. So I picked up this wallet. I was wondering, who it belongs to, and I was thinking that they probably miss it, and I was thinking that they're probably worried, and I was thinking that it would be nice to return the wallet to them. And so I didn't know what to do. So I held up the wallet and I waved, and I was pretty visible because I was wearing a Statue of Liberty costume. And I held up this wallet and I was waving it, hoping that they're going to see me and they're going to come up to me. And so at some point, somebody waved back to me and pointed at themselves. So they ran across the street and they picked up the wallet, and they were so thankful about the fact that I had found this wallet for them. I don't know if you noticed, throughout the whole story, I was talking about one person, and throughout the whole story, I used they, them pronouns. And it works just fine. If you walk in a pizza place and you need the bathroom and you don't know where the bathroom is, you're going to ask the manager. The manager's going to tell you, and you're going to thank them. And they're going to say you're welcome after they pointed to you where the bathroom is. That's one person, they, them. Because the thing is, maybe when you're speculating, oh, I'm going to ask the manager, you just don't know their gender. And with non-binary people, they're not men, they're not women. So you use they, them. And by the way, this has been in existence since the 1600s, and Shakespeare used it all the time. So to those grammar purists who all of a sudden are all about the grammar for the first time in their lives, no, it's perfectly fine to use they, them as singular. Ask Shakespeare. Okay, some definitions. So cisgender, I'm almost done, by the way. So cisgender is not a bad word. Cisgender, or cis for short. Cis means close to. So cisgender means that you align with the gender that you were assigned at birth. Somebody at birth said you're a girl, you're a woman, and you agree with that. As you grow up, you think in your head, what gender am I? And what comes to mind is, yeah, I identify with that. I'm a girl, I'm a woman. That's relatable to me. It would feel weird for somebody to interpret me as a man. So if it all aligns, and for one thing, you're lucky because you're going to spend a lot less money than I will. But that's cisgender. This word cis exists for a long time. On this side of the Alps is cisalpine. Across the Alps is transalpine. On this side of the Atlantic is cisatlantic. On the other side of the Atlantic is transatlantic. It's a perfectly regular word. Transgender means that your gender is different. Now, there's something about transgender that I want to say. I'm working on this thing, and this is a whole other class. So I'm not going to go into it, but transgender implies that you have to go through the work of transitioning. Transgender implies potentially surgeries, potentially hormones and stuff like that. And it implies that you're going to make all this adjustment to your body in order to comply to that some kind of cisgender notion of what it is to be a man or what it is to be a woman. I'm hoping that over time, we start looking at it a little bit differently. Many indigenous cultures have had words for people who are neither men nor women, or who were born male but identify as female, or who were born men but identify as male, born women identify as male. There's all of these words. There's Fafafini, there's in the Polynesian islands, there's Bakla in the Philippines, there's Hijra all over India. There's all these different words. Now indigenous cultures are using two-spirit a lot. So the word transgender is a word of our generation and of our century, and I'm hoping that it evolves into something else, because it conveys some notions about the fact that you were born in the wrong body and you need to change and all this, that are frankly exhausting. So anyway, it's a thing in motion, and we're all learning, and who knows what we're going to look at this like 100 years from now. But it's a process of liberation, and that I welcome. The word gay is usually contrasted or opposed to the word straight. I want you to stop and think for a second. And again, I'm almost done. The word straight, the word white, the word right-handed, these are not great words. Because what's the opposite of straight? The opposite of straight is bent. The opposite of straight is twisted. So that's, again, centering some people and putting some other people at the margins. Right-handed, left-handed. Another word for left is sinister. It's, archaic, whatever. But I'm left-handed. 100 years ago, people were literally persecuting left-handed people. So right-handed, straight, white, pure as white, white as snow. And the word black, having black thoughts, having dark thoughts, and all this. Our language is peppered with demonization of darker skin and raising up of lighter skin. A fair maiden means one of two things. A fair maiden means a beautiful woman or a really light-skinned woman. So we really need to start adjusting our language and thinking about our language. Okay, so a couple more things that I want to define. Intersectionality is a whole study that evolved in 1995 from a scholar called Kimberly Crenshaw, who came upon a really interesting situation. A Black woman was suing a company because she was being discriminated against and they wouldn't hire her. And the company fought back saying, we hire a whole bunch of Black people, we hire a whole bunch of women. So we're not discriminating. Upon further inspection, what Kimberly Crenshaw realized is that these people do hire a lot of Black people. They hire a lot of Black men and they work in the warehouse. And they do hire women. They hire a lot of white women and they work in the front office. They never hire Black women. So intersectionality is when your different marginalizations intersect. And so it's different if you're a woman or if you're a Jewish woman. It's different if you're a straight woman or a lesbian woman. It's different if you're a white trans woman, such as myself. Marginalized as I am in society, I have so much more privilege than a lot of trans women because I'm white looking, even though I'm an immigrant from South America. I'm white looking and I can pass for white. I am short, so a lot of people assume that I'm cisgender. I'm passable, this vague term that defines that people don't clock you all the time. People don't immediately point the finger at you and say, oh, that's a trans woman. So because of that, I get a pass in a lot of places. I don't get discrimination in a lot of places. Black trans women are so much more marginalized than white trans women in our society. They're murdered at a much higher rate. Hispanic trans women have a much different experience because of the queer phobia inside of Hispanic communities. So each one of us has to acknowledge the different intersections. And it gets really tricky if a white woman is arguing with a black man. And then you could get into something that's like marginalization Olympics. Who's more marginalized? And it's better to just be respectful of the fact that I know of my marginalization, but I don't know of yours. And I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt that things are rough for you too. A microaggression, and these happen a lot, microaggressions are little things that are not quite overtly screwed up. You can't quite call them out because they're vague, but they made you feel uneasy, they make you feel unwelcome. And the average person of color in Portland, where I live, experiences microaggressions all the time. For a year, I had a non-binary Asian, half Asian, half white roommate, and an Afro-Latina roommate. And we would sit at the table every day for dinner, and they would share, oh, somebody touched my hair. Oh, somebody told me to go back where I came from, which, by the way, they came from Denver. And I'm sitting there going, oh, I don't experience any racism. Of course you don't, dummy, because you're white. So it's important to realize that just because it doesn't happen to us, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And when you, especially when you're already in alert, when you're already sensitized to this, if I'm in a room with people who are strangers to me, who are all cisgender, who generally speaking seem to all be heterosexual, heteronormic in their thinking, I'm constantly at alert. Am I going to get a hit? Because when you walk into a room as a black person, you announce to everybody, hey, by the way, everybody, I'm black. But the racists don't raise their hands and say, oh yeah, I'm a racist. So you don't know. And when I walk into a room, sometimes, depending on how I look, I announce to everybody, I'm not saying I literally say this, but I'm saying that by my looks, I pretty much announce myself like, hey, there's a trans person in the room. But the transphobes don't raise their hands and say, oh yeah, I'm transphobic, you have to watch out for me. So you don't know. And because of that, it's hard to interpret the microaggressions. And it can really sit with you. So if you're being shown a home by a realtor and they made something that sounded kind of racist, but you don't know for sure, it'll stick with you and it'll eat at you. And then you probably won't want to do business with this person because you don't know. It sounded kind of weird. You see what I mean? So be careful with microaggressions. A really easy example, a really common example of a microaggression is referring to a black person who might be college educated, who might be a professional, to say something like, oh, you're so articulate. What are you implying with that? You're implying that you're surprised that they're articulate. You're implying that you wouldn't expect them to be. And that's a really good example of something that person doesn't go home thinking, oh, that's a compliment. Something that I get a lot as a trans woman is, you look like a real woman. I am a real woman. That's not a compliment to me. A couple more things. Code switching is when you have to switch the way that you talk in order for the people in the room to accept you. This is something very inherent with people of other cultures and with black and brown people, in the fact that they have to adjust how they usually would talk for the sake of the room. I was really saddened. I had a black roommate for a couple of years, and I was really saddened to see that I thought I knew them. I thought I was intimate with them, and then I was invited over to their family's house, and I was hanging out with their family. And the way that she spoke with her family and with black people was so different from the way that she spoke to me. And I understand. And it made me sad at the same time that she felt she had to do that with me. She had to do it for me. Last but not least, a few words to avoid, and this is not a comprehensive list, so please keep learning, keep trying to learn. Don't say gyp. Gyp comes from the assumption that gypsy people are going to steal and cheat from you, which is a racist stereotype. And gypsy people, the word gypsy is a racist word for Romani people. And Romani people were killed by the millions during the Holocaust, along with Jewish people, along with gay people, along with Polish people. So don't say gyp, don't say grandfather clause, don't say grandfather, because that comes from a time when you couldn't quite, as a Black person, become free because, no, you couldn't vote because your grandfather couldn't vote, so you couldn't vote either. Master bedroom, you probably use that all the time. This is the master bedroom. Yeah, great. There's a master in this plantation? That's great. Just say main bedroom. Peanut gallery. Quiet in the peanut gallery. That specifically refers to the fact that the peanut gallery was up there where people of color would get to sit. And oh yes, somebody says rule of thumb is a good one to avoid. The rule of thumb was the fact that the stick the husband could use to beat his wife could be no thicker than his thumb. So the rule of thumb is not necessarily a great word. A woman I know was sharing her wardrobe with me, and she showed me a tank top, a sleeveless tank top, and she said, like, yeah, I hardly ever wear a wife beater, but, and I was like, what? What did you just refer to that garment as? Don't say guys when you're referring to a mixed gender group. Don't say females to talk about women. Females is derogatory. It's an adjective. They're female people. I don't know if you realize, but a female rat is also female. A female worm is also female. And human females are called women. Don't say man hours. Don't say manning the booth. The funniest thing I ever heard was recently they were in the news. They were congratulating a whole team of women that were firefighters that were at the fire station. And they were talking about the fact how efficiently this team mans the fire station. Mans? Staffs the fire station. And don't say, of course, who's wearing the pants or I'm wearing the pants here, because women wear pants, trust me. And don't refer to a woman over 18 as girls or ladies, just say women. This brings me to the end. I want to play with you, I want to play for you 3 minutes of a video, and then I'm going to open up for questions. I realize that I've run a little bit long, but I think this is salient and this is worth listening to. This is not the full video. This is Jay Smooth. He's an activist I absolutely admire. And let me get to it here.
But in most other situations, when the possibility arises that we made a mistake, we are usually able to take a few deep breaths and tell ourselves, I'm only human, everyone makes mistakes. But when it comes to conversations involving race and prejudice, for some reason, we tend to make the opposite assumption. We deal with race and prejudice with this all or nothing, good person, bad person binary, in which either you are racist or you are not racist. And if you're not batting 1,000, then you're striking out every time. And this puts us in a situation where we're striving to meet an impossible standard. And if anything less than perfection means that you are a racist, that means any suggestion that you've made a mistake, any suggestion that you've been less than perfect is a suggestion that you're a bad person. So we become averse to any suggestion that we should consider our thoughts and actions. And it makes it harder for us to work on our imperfections. When you believe that you must be perfect in order to be good, it makes you averse to recognizing your own inevitable imperfections, and that lets them stagnate and grow. So the belief that you must be perfect in order to be good is an obstacle to being as good as you can be. So it would make our conversations with each other a lot smoother, and it would make us better at being good if we could recognize that we're not perfect and embrace that. So I want to offer a couple of things that you could keep in mind when you need to remind yourself that I'm not supposed to be perfect when it comes to navigating race. And the first thing is that anytime we're dealing with race issues, we are dealing with a social construct that was not born out of any science or reason or logic. We are grappling with a social construct that was not designed to make sense. And to the extent that it is the product of design, the race constructs that we live in America were shaped specifically by a desire to avoid making sense. They were shaped for centuries by a need to rationalize and justify indefensible acts. So when we grapple with race issues, we're grappling with something that was designed for centuries to make us circumvent our best instincts. It's a dance partner that's designed to trip us up. So just based on that alone, we should be able to keep in mind that you will never bat 1,000 when it comes to dealing with race issues. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is, as we are all imperfect humans, and as has been laid out in some of the other talks this evening, we all have unconscious thought processes and psychosocial mechanisms that prop up. There are many things in our day-to-day lives that lead us towards developing little pockets of prejudice, that lead us towards acting unkind to others without having any intent to do so. These are things that will just naturally develop in our day-to-day lives. So the problem with that all or nothing binary is it causes us to look at racism and prejudice as if they are akin to having tonsils. You either have tonsils or you don't. And if you've had your prejudice removed, you never need to consider. So if someone says, I think you may have a little unconscious prejudice, you say, well, no, my prejudice was removed in 2005. I went to see that movie Crash. It's all good. But that's not how these things work. When you go through your day-to-day lives, there are all of these mass media and social stimuli, as well as processes that we all have inside our brains that we're not aware of, that cause us to build up little pockets of prejudice every day, just like plaque develops on our teeth. So we need to move away from the tonsils paradigm of race discourse towards the dental hygiene paradigm of race discourse.
Let's all move away to the dental hygiene paradigm. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to show up. Hi. And unfortunately, I ate up more time than I expected. I hope that this was fruitful. But you can ask me questions now. You can also send me your questions to Cassie at cassiebrighter.com. And I just wrote that in the chat. But if you have a couple of questions, then go ahead and shoot. You can either ask Rochelle or Erica or write them in the chat. Oh, thank you, Laura. Thanks, Suzanne. Oh, I'm so glad, Missy.
Laurel had a great question when we were talking about comedians, and she was asking, and I'm trying to scroll back to where it was. She wanted to know about self-degradation, degradation in comedians, and is that okay? So many comedians do it.
You know, what's okay and what's not okay, there is no particular hard and fast rule other than to generally understand the fact that punching up at power is satire and is acceptable, and it's just the function of the court jester. And punching down at people who are powerless is oppression and tyranny. But yeah, it's interesting with self-degradation. I don't like it. It makes me feel sorry for them. It makes me feel sad about them. I mean, if it's really said with a lot of humor and you can say that this person has resilience and self-esteem beyond that, then it's fine. But, you know, I've gained 30 pounds over COVID. If I hear a woman making a lot of jokes about how fat she is, it makes me uncomfortable because she's also talking about me. So I think that it's not the best humor. It is funny to make fun of one's quirks. I tend to be always late. I'm working on it. So me making fun of the fact that I'm late kind of acknowledges the fact that, yeah, I see myself. I am trying to work on it. And I think that it lessens the tension in the room. So making fun of one's quirks is probably a good idea. Making fun of one's, you know, there's a great rule. Don't make fun of something that person couldn't fix in 10 minutes. If your makeup is all screwed up, a friend of yours can totally razz you about your makeup, which also means, girl, go to the bathroom and check yourself. But if somebody makes fun of your nose, that's a $6,000 to $10,000 surgery, and you might not have that on you right now.
And you might be really proud of your nose.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a good question. Yeah, humor is constantly evolving, and humor has generally a lot of times been used to signify these are the people who are in the center, and these are the people that only belong in the margins if they belong at all. Most of the jokes that my father told at the barbecue with his friends were transphobic, misogynistic, homophobic, ableist, just ghastly jokes that still haunt me to this day because I was listening to this as an invisible, hidden queer child, and they really affected me. And so, yeah, um, it's there's so many good jokes that are just surreal and funny. Robin Williams, Stephen Wright have these great comedic masterpieces that are not poking fun at anyone. They're just talking about the human experience. What else do we have here? Yeah, a lot of it is internalized. By the way, Dave Chappelle, I have a specific gripe that I have to tell about Dave Chappelle. He just wasn't funny.
Mm.
I really like when he's funny. I really like when he's witty. And when he speaks about the Black experience in white America, he's masterful because he makes us think of things that we miss. But he does not understand the trans experience at all. Actually, I do know a funny joke in relation to trans experience and in relation to Dave Chappelle. A friend of mine who is a comedian, she bills herself as the funniest Vietnamese trans woman in all of Los Angeles. She's probably the only. But her tweet about Dave Chappelle is, I would like to see Dave Chappelle's browser history for a minute, which I found hilarious. Because he has an obsession. And the thing is it wasn't funny. If he had said funny jokes, it would have been maybe more palatable, but it was 37 minutes out of a 50-minute special, and it was just expressing a viewpoint. It wasn't funny, it was expressing a viewpoint, and that viewpoint was, we hate trans women. Don't we all agree that we hate trans women? That's not funny to me. By the way, not to be missed, he spent 14 minutes bashing homosexual men, and then he spent 6 minutes bashing lesbian women, during which he proudly admitted punching a lesbian woman in the face. So, yeah, in case you missed everything else because of the transphobia, there was also that. It was ungraceful, in my opinion. And what have trans people ever done to him? He at one point he made a strange apology about the fact he said, like, I'm not mad at trans women, I'm mad at white people. He seemed to think for some reason that all trans women are white, that all trans people are trans women, and that all trans women are white. And no, there's a lot of trans people who are non-binary or who are trans men. And there's a heck of a lot of trans people who are Asian, Latina, indigenous, Black people. Some of us are also white. And yeah, some of us are white and we have unchecked privilege and we make asses of ourselves, and that's valid. But you don't need to trash trans people specifically to point that out. So yeah, I don't like Dave Chappelle that much anymore. I used to like him at one point.
We have two more questions. One is, there's a lot of groups in real estate that use the term master. So there's the Master's Circle, which is like an investment piece. There's a Facebook group that has the term masters in it. And then there's the PMAR Masters group. And so someone wanted to just have some insight into your thoughts on that term being used in all these different groups.
I think that we're working through an evolving society, and we have to think it through. We have to be thoughtful in how we do this. A master is a person who has achieved a craft. That's also a master. But a master is also the head of the plantation. So it could mean different things. And when words can mean different things, I like to avoid them. An example of this is my most recent partner was non-binary. They were also Asian. And so at one point I was talking about a weakness, and I said, that's a chink in your armor. And what I meant by that is that's the weakness in your armor. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm wrapping up. And they got really offended. And I had to explain that I was using a different word that sounds the same, and I just meant the chink is like an indent in your armor. But then they very validly said to me, it's like, just choose a different word. And so that's what I would say about master. Just choose a different word, if possible. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you meant it the way that in the worst possible way, but yeah, you could use it. You could use a different word.
Yeah, and I want to be respectful of your time, Cassie. So if you need to run, I don't want to keep you at all. There's one additional question, but
How can I say it? If I can address it succinctly, I will.
okay. The question is, what is the difference between transgender and transsexual?
Oh, I appreciate that. Okay, so real briefly, transsexual is somebody who has gone through all the surgeries and has achieved a certain standard, which was a standard by WPATH, which is the convention about it, and is now kind of like complete. That whole idea is going away because it takes away individual choice as to surgeries, as to body determination, as a lot of choices. Transgender is just the general umbrella grouping of people whose gender doesn't align with their sex at birth. And I think it's much better to say transgender. I wouldn't use the word transsexual anymore. I do have to run, but I'm hoping that answered that question.
That was the last of the question. Thank you so much, Cassie. I really appreciate your time. As always, it was so incredible. I learned so much every time you give these trainings. So, and our members are so grateful. So thank you again so much for your time and for teaching this.
I'm loving the chat. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cassie.
For everyone else joining us, just some upcoming webinars that we are offering here at Oregon Realtors, including landlord-tenant law and COVID. We'll be having an economic update from the Bowtie Economist, and that's sponsored by WVMLS. We have a GRI class. We've got a deep dive into lenders that is brought to you by the Professional Development Key Committee called Buckets of Money. We have 10 rules for your retirement roadmap, planning your financial future as realtors. And then we also have domestic well testing that's talking about wildfire recovery and domestic well testing services that exist for areas impacted by wildfires. So that's our upcoming class list. We hope to see you in some of those, and we look forward, and thank you so much for making time today to join us. Your CE certificate will be here in about 2 weeks. Again, you can follow us on all these social media outlets. We post market updates and post about classes and events. So we hope you follow us. Have a lovely rest of your day, and you'll get your CE certificate or email regarding your CE certificate in about 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.